McLean. Dick Coach's Corner.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer.
For someone to explain.
Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby.
The distinction between these mandatory.
Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode number 3 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and I'm joined today with Stuart Armstrong. Stuart's a talent development specialist, a talent coach, and a professional coach developer, and is the current player pathways manager for the RFU. He is a sports science graduate from the University of Wales and has worked in sports development for the past 15 years. As well as rugby, Stuart has been involved with hockey, cricket, and golf, with a lot of those being at the elite level. And you can even find him on weekends coaching under-8s hockey and under-9s cricket, where his goal, as he puts it, is to create an amazing sports experience. So I'm stoked to have him on the show. So welcome, Stuart.
Hi, Andrew. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for joining us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Great. So tell us a little bit about your backstory, about how you ended up in the role as player pathway manager for the RFU.
It's as most difficult journeys are, it's a pretty roundabout way of arriving here. I definitely wouldn't have, if you'd asked me however many years ago when I started out in the world of work, if I'd been working for the RFU, I probably would have laughed at you. I'm like a lot of kids, actually. I'm probably part of the reason I'm in the role that I am. I'm one of those kids who was kind of, developed fairly late, played rugby as a child, played through school, and then, everybody else grew real fast, and I was a little bit left behind and got involved with a few other different sports, just trying different things, became a bit of a jack of all trades.
Yep.
Then I went on and did a sports science degree. The art teacher caught me on the sports field for the 15th time and said, "I think you should have a career in sport." Turned out to be pretty good advice.
Yep. For sure.
And so I ended up working, did a sports degree, and then worked in sports development for a number of years. Just getting across different sports, lots of participation activity, just locally where I was living. And then I started working in golf, doing children's golf. We launched a program called Try Golf, which is kind of like a junior version of golf, designed to play in a small school environment, inside, safe, and it's a pretty great, it's a pretty good program. I kind of wish I had the patent on it. It got about 1 million children a year playing that game, so I'm pretty proud of that. And then I moved on and I started working in talent development in golf, and I did 5 years then working in the performance environment, working with kind of players coming through sort of mid-adolescence. And I guess from then on, my career's all been talent development, working with kind of, that kind of adolescent player in a number of different environments. So I moved from golf. I started working in, did a bit of stuff in the private sector, and then I worked for Sports Coach UK, working with 15 different sports on their talent pathways, developing talent coaches across the whole landscape. And then that role really brought me across to rugby, just bringing that kind of knowledge from the different sports and the background I've got, and sort of bringing that into the role that I now have within rugby.
Oh, that's great. And there's no questioning the passion for sports and talent development, and I think that's reflected today with the interview. This is actually, for the listeners, this is actually the second time we've done the interview. Stuart and I did one a little while back, and the internet wasn't that kind to us that day, and Stuart's been kind enough to go again. So thanks a bunch for that.
No problem at all. Just installed an upgraded internet capacity as well, so hopefully it should be a lot better.
Perfect. No, it's going well so far. So with the crossover for sports, there must be, from a coaching perspective, do you see a lot of similarities in, for example, someone coaching a golf swing to someone coaching someone kicking for points or something like that?
There's definitely some similarities. In fact, the similarities between golf and kicking. I was actually talking recently with our under-20s coach, John Callard, who specialises in kicking as well. And we were actually talking about some of the parallels between the golf swing and kicking and all those sorts of things. And there's definitely some crossover there. But the sports are very different in the sense that a game like golf's obviously much more of a it's not quite a closed skill, but it's more closed skill than something that's kind of much more dynamic than like a rugby field where it's kind of multiple decisions to be made, in the blink of an eye. So there is definitely differences in sort of coaching methodologies, and that's the same, for example, if you're working with, say, canoeing or rowing or something like that in comparison to, say, cricket or football. They are quite different in terms of the coaching challenges, and the needs of those coaches are slightly different. However, what is the same, and certainly the challenges that they face are all pretty much the same. And so what I found was we launched a program while I was at Sports Coach, which was called the Talent Coach Breakfast Clubs, where we brought coaches from different sports together to share. What was really interesting was how they all had the same sorts of challenges.
Right.
Largely, they were under-resourced. Yeah. So most of them had kind of found themselves in the talent work by their own development, really, kind of through trial and error. So there was some interesting stuff there, and it was all then really interesting as well to see, say, for example, like the hockey coaches getting the sprints guy, in the corner and kind of grilling him for information about how to make their athletes faster. So it's really good to watch.
Yeah, that's great. So how would you describe your current role then with the projects that you're managing with the RFU?
I've got it's kind of a unique role, really. I'm not sure initially it was necessarily designed to be like this, but it's kind of ended up like this, where I've kind of we've got two kind of major challenges, I suppose, in the sport. One is kind of helping, that young player really kind of take the next steps and really develop as a rugby player. The other one is keeping hold of them. What we find is they have a journey. They either start quite early. The research we did, they start quite early. They play for a long time, and then kind of by the time they reach 16, they struggle, I think, and maybe start to look for other things to do. They kind of almost become a bit jaded by their experiences. The other one is maybe they played in a school environment for quite some time, and then they get to a stage where they're finding themselves, they leave the school environment, maybe they go to university, they've got a load of other things that they can do, and we definitely lose them there. So we see quite a significant drop-off in participation terms at 16 and 18. So the job I have really is to combine talent development with retention. So I'm actually kind of essentially testing a hypothesis on a national scale with 5,000 athletes to basically show that you can do a talent development and you can really improve the abilities of these players, and in so doing, you keep more of them in the game.
Yeah. So my understanding is you're overseeing 5,000 athletes across the country, and that's like the bottom of the pyramid that you're funneling towards high performance. That sounds like a massive undertaking.
It's the first rung of what we call our talent pathway.
Yep.
So at 13, we don't do any talent work before then.
Yep.
It's very much focused on participation, and then at 13, they sort of take their first steps, and it's very much that kind of transition point. So it's kind of about improvement and development without necessarily getting too selective. We definitely wanted to keep the pathway as broad as we possibly could for as long as we possibly could. So a number of years ago, before I took on this role, that number would have been a lot smaller, would have been about maybe 1,500.
Okay.
And so it obviously got very narrow very quick, and surprise, you saw a lot of kids who were, bigger or older or whatever. So, now by having 5,000 in the program, you can keep players who are slightly less developed in there, and you can see how they develop. Also, you can equalise the opportunity. Previously, a lot of the kids who came through were coming from that prep school environment because they just had more exposure. So what we're doing now is we've got kids in from state schools. We've got a really great state school program called All Schools, and we're seeing kids feed into that who are pretty raw, really, but they've got, for example, great athleticism and a great attitude. So, you can develop the skills given the right environment. And so that's kind of what it's about. We create the environment for them to develop and to sort of give more opportunities for those kids who've got something, a little spark, and then help them come through.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it sounds like it'll definitely pay dividends. I think from just looking at talent development in rugby, I think a lot of kids are let go way too early. And I know I remember reading online, Scott Fardy, the current 6 for Australia, he was missed by all pathways in Australia, ended up playing in Japan and then came back and is now the incumbent 6 for the Wallabies. And I know that was a bit of quite the bugbear for him. Are you seeing things like that, where the smaller kid who's a hard worker is, there's an overtaking period at some stage from the bigger kid.
Yeah, the data really supports that, actually. We've got some data within rugby that some research that's sort of emerging out of one of our own academies, actually, that supports that in a big way, and you can see it actually in some of the data from other sports as well, where you see the early intake, you see, essentially relatively old children being picked up, but then by the time they reach sort of full maturity and international status, then that's almost like gone the other side. So you're seeing more of the kind of relatively young sort of quarter 3, quarter 4 kids, players who are coming through, and one of the hypotheses that is coming out from that research is actually those relatively young kids develop grit. They develop grittiness because they've had to overcome the barriers of being, physically disadvantaged. Whereas the older kids who get the intake, they're what's called, almost like big kid, lazy kid. They kind of get away with it because they don't have to develop the skills. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword where, on the one hand, you've got the group that come in who you really need to stretch and take them beyond their capabilities. And on the other hand, you've got the group who are kind of left out. And so what we're trying to do is to try and not leave out as many as we have in the past, so that you've got more opportunity to see actually who is going to emerge given a relative set of circumstances. So it's an interesting challenge, and you've also got the challenge of increasing the volume of participants and not diluting the quality of the operation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's also a challenge. That's an ongoing one that I'm not saying we've got everything right as far as that's concerned. So we're working on ways in which we can be more effective as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, and I think coaches play a huge role in that, especially like for both the big kid and the late developer. The way you send your messages to those kids. I think that's crucial for them to. The big kid's got to know that it's not always going to be this easy, and the little kid's got to know that, if he grinds away and chips away, that good things will happen.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the coach is essential as far as I'm concerned, and this is why I do what I do, and this is my kind of lifelong passion. I'm a talent coach myself, and my journey, I haven't got aspirations to be, say, a national coach. I just want to be the absolute best talent coach I can be, and it's it's an ongoing kind of journey that I'm on. And what I try and do as well is pass on that information or stuff I learn with others to sort of help them make that sort of development as well. And it's a really difficult job. I mean, I that's the frustration I have, is people don't understand how challenging it is. I mean, back in the day in the Eastern Bloc, I'm led to believe that they used to pay the kind of talent coach in the clubs more money than the national coach, and their rationale was that the national coach's job's easier. You just put everybody in the same colour shirt and off you go, whereas the guys in the clubs are the ones doing all the hard work.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I totally buy that idea. I mean, I think they're. And I say this a lot when I'm running kind of workshops and seminars. I say that the talent coach is the guy who you've never heard of, or the girl you've never heard of. But then if you research it, and I was fortunate enough to speak to a number of kind of Olympians and kind of champions in their own fields, and one of the things they always said is they always said, oh, if it wasn't for such and such,
exactly.
and when they were like 13 or 14, they wouldn't have arrived where they were. So for me, I'm thinking to myself, these people are really important to our system, and yet when you then look at sports training offer, or you look at the education that the talent coach gets, you even look at the resources provided for coaches working in this environment, and it just doesn't stack up. So we're kind of leaving it to chance, and more often than not, what we end up doing is spending a lot of time and money kind of fixing or developing the kind of elite player rather than doing the development work beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's quite often a bit too late in that situation.
Either that, or it's just very inefficient. I mean, you spend an inordinate amount, kind of developing a movement pattern in somebody that could have been done so much earlier, before that movement pattern, the wrong movement pattern became ingrained. So I just think it's not some people see it the other way around. They think that it's actually inefficient to do it earlier. I have this debate with Dr. Ross Tucker quite a lot. And he thinks he just looks at it purely economically and goes, well, if you're spending a load of money on kids, only a small proportion are going to make it. Well, the way I look at it is, but it means that you can save a lot of time, effort and money with that player later on down the track, which means you can be doing much more high performance stuff with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's the way of the world, isn't it? People just look at the return on investment and they go, okay, so 5,000 kids, of which, let's say, 2 or 3% are going to make it. Why do we spend a lot of money on that? Why don't we just see what emerges and make it a little bit better when it gets there? I just see that as what I call a retrofit model of talent development. I think the job should be to prepare the kids for the next stage rather than let them get there and then try and make them better for that stage. It just doesn't seem the right way to do it for me.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're maybe setting them up for failure if you're not getting those basic, like you say, movement patterns sorted early.
Absolutely, and then of course not just the physical or the technical side; it's the mental, the psychological side.
The whole athlete.
Yeah, they get to that sort of higher level, and they can't cope, and it's just purely because they haven't had the preparation.
Yeah, no, that's right. And that then leads to what sounds like your second full-time job. Are you getting 2 salaries for that? The retention side of things.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Emails too. It's an interesting challenge. To be fair, there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a number of different areas. I mean, did I mention I'm doing sevens as well? I just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah.
So, the retention side's an interesting one. We did quite a lot of research into this, and we were looking at kind of, what is the kind of 16 to 25-year-old, 24-year-old player, what are they looking for from their kind of sports experience? And I mean, some of the things that we've identified are quite interesting, but one in particular was that, how strong the kind of social connection with the game is. And that's a real strength. But the problem we have is when they reach that kind of 18, they just assume that they're just going to all filter into adult rugby. And the vast majority was saying to us, well, it's great, but I'm playing with a load of guys who are my dad's age, and they're nice guys, but it's not the same as it was playing with my mates. So we're looking at all sorts of different ways in which we can look, create sort of competitive opportunities where the players can play, with their friendship group for longer, and therefore sort of allow the transition into adult rugby to be more natural.
Yeah, and what happens on the bottom of a ruck in those situations a bit different than what would happen with their mates, no doubt.
Exactly.
All right. So I browse on your website, the talent coach, quite regularly, and one of the things you talk a lot about is the difference between talent identification and talent development. Is that you're pushing your model with the RFU is a talent development model over a long period of time, whereas a lot of people think it's just going out to a rugby park and picking the superstars, and that's how you develop players. Is that what you're looking at?
Entirely, and it goes back to the point I was making earlier. If you go out there and you do essentially a talent ID model, for me, I think there's 2 or 3 things that at play there. One is essentially when you go through that selection process, you're actually deselecting the majority, and if you don't get it right, then you've said to the other group you're not as good.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of there's a concept called the stereotype threat, where essentially people live up to the kind of stereotype that they are allocated towards. Like an example would be women drivers, for instance. Well, statistically, whenever they do stats, it turns out that women are actually, when they do tests, women are actually worse drivers than men. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for this.
I'll forward it to you.
But it's only because when they discover it's only because they know that they've got a stereotype of being worse drivers. They're not actually worse drivers. It's just that when they're under a test scenario, because they know that they actually have the challenge of not being a bad driver, they actually perform worse. So this happens in the same scenario as well, where kids who are sort of deselected then kind of think, I've not been given, I'm clearly not as good as the other people. That becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is that if you get it wrong, so let's say you make a bet on a child at 13 or 14 or 15, pre-maturation, it's pretty difficult to do this. I mean, it's no better than a coin flip, really, in terms of how often you get it right and wrong. Then, you've kind of left the others to their own devices. And if you're lucky, they might come back and they might be better. But the problem is it's really atrocious. What most of those kids do is find something else. So they go and find another sport, they go and find something else to do, and they see if they can, ply their wares elsewhere. And well, I don't think, certainly in the world I live in, I don't think we've got enough players. We've got a lot, but we haven't got enough, I don't think, to be able to just cast a load aside on the basis that we've got a few wrong and we've got a few right. So if you go down the talent development route, and you look at it over a period of time, and you then you're giving people a better experience, so therefore you're going to retain more, and actually you're going to give them an enhanced experience as a player and make players better. The ones that you do get right, you get right more often. And actually, more often than not, through that 3 or 4 year or 2 or 3 year period, the vast majority, the cream kind of rises to the top by itself. So you get talent identification as a byproduct of the development process rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And so if you've got some advice to give to some coaches who might be involved in, selecting a representative side or, selecting a school side or something like that, how do we move away from that obsession with size in talent identification? Like, size is obviously important in a collision game like rugby, but what's some advice you give to coaches if they were selecting a team tomorrow?
Well, one of the things that we work on as far as talent development is concerned, so in our environments, what we've done is we've decoupled our talent development environments from competition. Now, that doesn't mean they don't play games and stuff. Obviously they do, and games are a core part of the way we do the development process anyway. But we're not developing them for the needs of a game at the weekend. So club coaches, they've got a match to play, so they've got to get them ready. Schools coaches have got a match to play, they've got to get them ready. And so their focus tends to be somewhere else. And that's entirely fine, there's no problem with that. But there needs to be space as well for pure and simple player development based on those generic needs. So we certainly pre-maturation avoid actually looking at position-specific skills at all. We're looking to, develop a whole player in all aspects, because what we know is that although a 14-year-old might be 6 foot tall and therefore, look like they should be a second row, by the time they're 25 or 24, they may not have grown anymore, and they're probably a relatively small centre by then. But they haven't developed the skills of a centre because they've been in the second row. So we want to look, and what we're finding as well is at the elite level, the vast majority of or a significant number of the players playing, kind of say for the England side, weren't playing in the same position when they were in adolescence. They've actually become a different player. So like Tom Youngs is a good example. He was a centre all the way through his childhood and only converted to hooker relatively late. So what we're saying is that actually nowadays the way the game is going, you kind of want all of the skills of a rugby player, and then you can specialise a lot later.
Yeah, absolutely. You see that a hooker needs to be an extra back row, or he or she.
But sorry, I didn't really answer your question. In answer to the question, going back, what advice would I have for those coaches would be to try and mix that up. So to ensure that you've got the balance between doing stuff for the needs of the competitive opportunity that you're going to have at the weekend, and then also doing stuff that's purely developmental based on everybody there, and also trying almost to, certainly with this adolescent player, is to move away from the focus entirely on you play here, you play here, you play here, and actually genuinely mixing up where people play. I mean, in a utopian world, I would encourage more coaches to get together and say, this week, why don't we're not going to play 15 aside, we'll play a different version. We'll play a load of 10 aside with different rules and those sorts of things to really challenge players in different ways and have different players playing in different positions. But sometimes I'm accused of having a few too many wacky ideas, so I'm realistic that might not happen everywhere.
Yeah. No, but you raise a good point that, especially pre-maturation, having a 100-metre field and 15 aside with rolling mauls and those kind of things is probably not the direction we want to take.
No, not really. I mean, like you say, I think you've got to make the game kind of fit the developmental. It's got to be developmentally appropriate for the player. And as an adult, whenever I talk about sevens is interesting. There's quite a lot of people who get, go, oh God, sevens, oh no, it's not for me because the pitch is too big and there's too much hard work running up and down that field. Well, we do exactly the same thing with 13-year-olds. So I don't understand why it seems inappropriate for. What seems inappropriate for an adult should be appropriate for a 13-year-old. We're too quick, I think, to try and get to the adult game because we want to see the adult game played by children, whereas in actual fact they'd be much better off playing 10s for a longer period.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. So let's talk a bit more about practice design and pedagogy, if you will. What are some of the common mistakes you're seeing coaches make when it comes to the sessions that they're running?
Wow, God, we could be here a long time. You need part 2, 3, and 4. So some of the mistakes or the errors I have. Well, first and foremost, one of the things I don't see enough of is what I call selling the why.
Okay.
Which is kind of framing the purpose or framing the nature of the activity and kind of what its focus is. So I see a lot of coaches say what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So they're very clear, they get a board out and they say, this is what we're going to do, but I don't hear them say why.
Yeah.
And that's critical, and it's critical for a number of reasons. One is, firstly, player engagement. If they understand that you're doing this or that what you're doing is for them to develop this particular aspect, first and foremost, they're immediately more engaged because they understand it's for them. Secondly, you can also get really strong buy-in to particular forms of training that might not normally want to go into. So, for instance, I'll give an example. If the group agree, for example, that what we're going to work on is something that's going to help them deal with like the pressure of competition, they might decide to, you might be able to explain to them that we're going to do something that has quite significant consequence attached to, to say, either winning or losing or not achieving a particular goal that they describe for themselves. And in doing that, you get, you might get them bought into the idea of, some consequence-based pressure training, which brings about a performance outcome that they wouldn't otherwise buy into. They might just see it as, you're just punishing us. Yeah. Well, actually, if you sell the why, it's not punishment. It's part of the process of becoming better. And so that's probably one of the big ones for me, is that kind of whole that kind of explanation of framing of the session and getting that kind of athlete buy-in.
Yeah, and some accountability as well for actions. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that probably leads me to my next question. Do you think profession or pastime of coaching rugby is it changing fast enough in your opinion? Like, or are we still somewhat stuck in the 80s with how we were coached? When we were kids, and that's been passed on to future coaches.
It's really hard to say. I think what I'm generally seeing is I think a lot of people with a lot of desire to improve as a general rule. And when you talk about the profession, I think certainly there's a number of people who are extremely committed. I'm always impressed by rugby coaches and how committed they are.
Yeah.
However, I'm also sometimes quite surprised as well. So, for instance, I quite often will do a session with a group of coaches, and I'll just ask them some questions like, have you read, say, the Talent Code, or have you read the Sports Gene, or something along those lines, and very few hands go up.
Yeah.
So it suggests to me that it's quite the audience is pretty practical. They're very into learning, very much into doing, but not so keen on the kind of research to develop themselves, taking on new concepts and learning new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So as a result, I do think that there's still a way to go. Now, as a general rule, I think there's definitely a real desire and a hunger for kind of more information and for more knowledge and to do things in a better way. But I do also think that if I looked at it probably over the generic kind of environment, that there's a lot of probably less than optimal activity taking place, because the vast majority of our coaches are dads who go along with their sons and get involved as volunteers, and and they do their best, but they don't always know the right thing to do, and they don't always know the wrong thing to do necessarily. So it's a difficult one, but I do think there's I think it's it's looking good, it's looking better. I'm definitely picking up some good vibes from the kind of industry, if you like. There's just some, I think it's always going to be a piece of work that we've got to continue to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a wealth of content out there too. Often you can get lost in all of it as well. And I think what a lot of people will do, they'll go for that silver bullet as well. They'll jump onto YouTube and they'll type in rucking drill, and that's going to be the drill that's going to make their team be dominant at the breakdown. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, and I think governing bodies are guilty. I mean, not just rugby governing bodies. I think all the governing bodies I work with are not being good enough at modelling what good looks like.
Yep.
And it's pretty difficult to do because actually it's quite subtle, and people don't realise the skill involved in high quality coaching. Kind of everyone thinks they can do it. This is the thing about coaching. Everybody thinks they can be a great coach, but actually the skill of being a great coach is, wow. I mean, it's really something to behold. So, I think one of the things that we need to be better at is kind of really making it clear what good looks like, so that people can kind of almost understand where they are against that. You almost need like I joke about this a lot, but you almost need like a karate belt system. I mean, like levels, like level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 is just too broad, too big. You almost need you need to be able to be like a black belt triple down coach, so people can kind of understand, wow, that's a real expert. They really know what they're talking about,
Yeah, especially with the way that level 3 has kind of evolved. The old level 3 was a technical level 3 that you could do in a weekend, whereas the current level 3 is way more complex than that, and the two just can't be compared.
Absolutely. And nowadays, a level 3 is the equivalent of a degree.
Yeah, it's pretty much.
And it takes quite a bit of work. Some of the stuff that comes out from our level 3 coaches is pretty impressive in terms of the research pieces of work that they've done. So, but the problem you've got, of course, is that's a relatively small number that get to that level. Yeah. So a big part of my job is to say, right, how can we make a level 2 coach a way better level 2 coach? Because for some of them, level 3 is beyond their reach.
Yeah, and they don't want it either.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what about a session that you run? What's it going to look like if someone's kind of watching a session that you're doing? What's it going to look like? What are they going to see and hear?
Depends who I'm coaching. I mean, I do little ones on Sundays or Friday nights. I do Friday night cricket in the summer with the under 9s, and I do on a Sunday morning I do the under 8s. They're the real coaching challenges right there. When you've got 30 under 8s with hockey sticks or cricket bats, and they're swinging them around.
Weapons.
So. But what you see in that environment will be quite different in terms of what you'll see. What you will see, though, is a lot of similarity. So, for example, you'll see themes and things. So you'll definitely see a lot of games. You'll definitely see a lot of reps. Everyone's getting a lot of goes.
Yep.
So really small groups, very little cues, hardly any cues if at all possible, within the realms of safety. But as much as possible, it's about, and what you'll also see is competition. So games, and you'll see challenges, and you'll see, you hear me with kids particularly, I use a lot of video game language. Yeah. So we have things like power-ups, and we have lives, and we have I'll say, okay, well, you're ready for level 2 or you're ready for level 3, and it'll go up in little notches. And I'm just using a kind of constraints-led approach, but in their language, it's going up a level. And, they're always looking for that extra challenge to go up to the next stage and to stretch them in a different way. And to be honest, I kind of do the same with 16 and 17-year-olds. Yeah. But with probably some slightly different language. But what you'll see there again is, a lot of reps, a lot of opportunities to fail. And I'm big on that in terms of framing the environment. So one of the things I'm talking about in my environment a lot is failure, and actually encouraging them to kind of stretch themselves beyond their capabilities. The interesting thing I found with working with a lot of adolescents is how unprepared to fail they are, how they want to look good in front of their peers. Normally it's because they want to be selected, and in my environment it's like, well, I'm not selecting you here, I'm here to help you develop, so this is where you're free. But interestingly, they're so conditioned by their environments to not get things wrong that it's very, very difficult for them to unshackle themselves. So I'm kind of starting to use some like reverse language in the one-to-ones I have with them. I have like quick micro one-to-ones, and I'll be saying to them, yeah, see what you did there? That was good, that's tidy, but you could do that, you could do that in your sleep. What you've come here for is to do things that you can't do in your sleep. So you and I are going to have conversations when you do things that you can do. But you'll get like nothing but kind of positivity from me when you do things that are outside of your comfort zone, even if you get them wrong. And an example of that would be, one of the things I do is when we're giving like points and stuff, quite often I'll shout out a point for somebody who's done something wrong. They've just done something, they've tried something out and it's not worked. And I shout out point for Jenny, or point for Rob, or whatever. And then afterwards, when we do a bit of a review, I'll say, do you remember me giving that point out to Rob? And they'll say, yeah, why did I give that point? And then some of the clued up ones will be like, well, he had a go at that. Go, yeah, exactly. And then you're just trying to subtly get that message out there around how safe it is to fail. But it's an interesting challenge. It's one I continuously fight with.
Yeah, and I think that's so ingrained, like you say. It comes from parents, it comes from school, it comes from society. So if we as coaches can make that environment a mistake-friendly environment, and we lead that environment, I think that's crucial.
Girls particularly. I mean, girls are very, very failure averse. But interestingly, boys are too, but in a different way. And this is something that people may not observe. What boys tend to do is they go the other way. So they'll do like outlandish skills, and in so doing, go, look, I'm trying these things out, but they're never going to do the basics and fail at those, because they know they'd be exposed. So what they tend to do is like crazy skills that they would never probably do in a game, just to make it look like they've embraced the culture. Yeah. You have to really get underneath that with them. You have to really stretch them and really pressurize them, and they actually go, now what would you genuinely do? If we're now going to do some scenario here where if you get this wrong, right, you're going to, you might have some sort of significant consequence. What is it you're going to do here? And they go, do that really, really well. And so it's an interesting dynamic with boys sometimes, particularly adolescent boys who are full of bravado, that actually they're so failure averse that they actually pretend to fail when they're not actually failing, if you know what I mean. They do things they know they can't do.
Yeah, well, I teach at an all-boys school, so daily I'm surrounded by almost 800 of them, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
You know that inside out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. What you mentioned positions and how you don't focus on that with the talent groups that you're working with. When do you bring in position-specific work with the athletes that you're working with?
Well, it's very difficult to be broad about that, because it's very dependent on the individual. So obviously somebody who's matured relatively early, and you've got then some pretty clear markers as to what their kind of predicted sort of height is likely to be, their size, weight, etc. You can probably begin the process then of some position specificity, but for others that are maturing later, you've just got to delay it. So as a general rule, the general rule is as late as possible,
right, without
compromising their future development. However, I think if the base of skills is broad enough and strong enough, then I think it's easier then to. It's almost like the old concept of the fundamentals. What are the fundamental core skills of your sport, and how can somebody become really, really highly proficient in those? And then once you've got that, you've got essentially a foundational base from which you can build a kind of a position-specific structure on top of. I think what we often find though is. I was actually talking to one of our academy managers the other night about a young player who is a giant, at the age of 17, is a giant. He's probably about 6'8", 6'10". He's, what is it, about 110 odd kilos, something along those lines. And, but the problem is he hasn't got a body and a physique to transport that giant frame around with any level of athleticism. Yeah. Now, somebody like that, you kind of have to take out the competitive environment altogether, and you have to let them develop, and you have to let them build. Otherwise, they're either going to break, or they're just never going to develop as effectively as they could do. Now, in his environment, we can do that, because we can take him out of the picture. But in another scenario, if he didn't have that kind of support, he'd be being played every single week in a single position, probably not developing a full range of athletic capabilities, and as a result, he'd be a suboptimal athlete. Yeah. So, it's very much horses for courses.
Yeah, he'd be... Pass it to the big kid and just make him run all day, and that's all. That's his rugby experience.
Absolutely right. A load of other kids hanging off his legs.
Yeah, and pushing a few props around every now and then too. Yeah. What kind of contact time do the academy coaches have with their athletes? How often are they seeing them?
It depends. So as the further up the stages you go, it moves towards kind of like a weekly model, and then you're beginning to start to see them on more than that. It's then definitely by 2 or 3 times a week. Certainly at the younger ages, the sort of 13 and 14-year-olds, We're either doing monthly sessions, but that's definitely not enough. We want to move towards weekly sessions, but that's kind of an evolving model for us. The vast majority of our academy programs, we've got them on a weekly basis, but we're always balancing that off against the challenges and the demands they've got with other activities and what have you.
And is that in season, or is it kind of overlap with the off season as well?
No, we're generally doing it in season.
Yeah.
With a 13 or 14-year-old, they should be doing 3 or 4 sports. Therefore, you don't want to get into the summer too much and clash with other sports.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right. Well, we always finish the show off with 4 questions about rugby players and coaches. So, when you were growing up as a kid, who was your favourite player that got you into the game or got you excited about rugby?
Well, the last time we did this, I kind of gave you a couple of players, but since then there's probably a few others that have kind of popped up that came to mind. Right. And one of them is actually doing a really great. He's doing a piece of ambassadorial work for us, helping us get adults back into the game who've stopped playing. Okay. And that's Lewis Moody.
Oh, yeah.
He's great. I mean, he's come back to he works in a grassroots club and he's got involved with doing a load of stuff, and he's really, got behind our campaign to try and bring people back to the game. And you couldn't have a better ambassador, really passionate about it, done loads of stuff for us, helping people come back. He actually took a load of guys from some of these clubs out to a hospitality day at the recent England-Australia game, which we won't talk about, and did a great job for us and is helping us really do that. But as a player, I mean, he kind of epitomised, I think, kind of one of the what it's great to be English, really. He's absolutely dedicated, put himself on the line. They called him Mad Dog, because absolutely. He was just 100% dedicated to what he was doing, and he wanted to be an ultimate professional. And, just listening to him talk about his experiences, he was the ultimate professional, in that transition period where the game went from being kind of an amateur into an early stages of professionalism. But he definitely took professionalism to a new level. So, he's definitely one of my kind of heroes.
He won a World Cup too, which we don't talk about either on this show.
Yeah, that's something we don't talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, great. He's not long out of the game too, so that's great for your cause for the retention side of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
And who'd you mention? Was it Jeremy Guscott? Was your other one last time?
That would be the other one. Yeah, because he's. We used to talk about him. He had that kind of grace, that kind of. He used to make it look effortless. And I always think this about great athletes. One of the ways you can spot them is it almost looks like they're not trying, but they do it so well with such an economy of effort. And yet, there's something about that. They always have that little bit of extra time. They always have that little bit of something else. They do the unexpected things. And Guscott was definitely in that bracket for me.
Yeah, absolutely. He was great. He was one of the greats for sure. Okay, and what about current players? Who are you liking?
Anthony Watson is a very exciting prospect. He reminds me a lot of Jason Robinson.
Yeah.
He's got that kind of ability to kind of go from flat out to directly lateral and then straight again at flat out. And he's just, he's got that kind of elusive capability that is, you don't see very often. So he's a pretty exciting prospect. And then there's a few others out there as well, who kind of maybe a little bit more on the periphery, who haven't kind of, fully kind of broken in there yet. I suppose the other one who's really, up there for me as well is George Ford. I just love watching him play. I love his creativity and his vision, and I love the way he kind of makes things tick. So they're two guys certainly in the England setup who really impress me. And then on the kind of international stage, I mean, Israel Folau's amazing.
Yeah.
Every time he gets the ball, I'm just kind of fearful, because it looks like he's just going to he just gets through every single time, or he gets at least half a breakthrough. The amount of players he brings in is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and under the high ball as well, it's almost a guarantee.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable to watch. Okay. And so, what about coaches? Who are some of the higher profile coaches that you admire and like?
The guy who I'm probably a little bit biased. I did a training course with a guy who went on to he's kind of become my kind of mentor, a guy called Mark Bennett. Mm-hmm. And on that training course, I did the training course with Mike Ford. He was the England defence coach, and he's now the head coach at Bath. And Bath have had a real renaissance. They've really come back from being a fairly kind of average outfit, and he's got them challenging every single year. And Mike's a great guy, and he's done a number of like coach development sessions for me, and he's never afraid to be really honest and kind of explain some of his issues and the challenges he's faced through his career. And he's been brilliant in terms of just being open and honest. And he's still like that now, and he's quite open to explain on the journey he's on. And I just love watching the way his teams play. They play with abandon. They play without fear. They do things that are just not the norm whatsoever. And there's a group of players there who are coming through who are just different animals altogether. So Mike Ford's definitely one of those.
That's great. All right. And what about some coaches who are chipping away in the trenches who deserve a mention?
There's loads of those around. You could kind of go on. One I just think that's probably worth mentioning that many people definitely won't have heard of is Anastasia Long.
Yeah.
The story behind her is she teaches at a school in South London. I forget the name of it now, but went into this school. They didn't do rugby. And then she didn't do rugby, but just decided to start doing rugby because of a stimulus from one of our community rugby coaches trying to get rugby into schools. And awesome. She went on a couple of courses and she took this school through to the kind of final of the under 15 schools Vars competition, from absolutely nowhere. And these kids played this brand of rugby like you'd never seen, just street kids just playing this amazing game. And they ended up I think they lost in I think it might be the semi-final, the final to Whitgift, which is one of the sort of traditional powerhouse schools, but it was only by like a couple of points.
Wow.
And they were like the real heroes. It's like someone should make a movie out of it. It was like it's like a Coach Carter type film. So she's definitely one to try and look for coming through the ranks.
That's great. No, I spent 3 years teaching in the East End of London, and it's extremely challenging to say the least. So I'm sure she faced many of the same challenges, but she's done a way better job than I did by the sounds of that. So that's great.
Yeah, brilliant.
All right. Well, before we let you go, what's the best way some people can kind of see what you're up to, social media wise, what you're putting out, and what you're talking about?
So you can get me at my website's called the Talent Equation, which is www.thetalent.equation.co.uk. So I blog on there on a bit of an infrequent basis at the moment because I'm pretty busy with World Cup Act stuff. But I'm on there, and so you can all the stuff I put on there is just pretty regular. I'm fairly active on Twitter. You definitely get a lot more out of me on Twitter at the moment. So I'm at Stu_Arm. And then also there's a Facebook page where I'm putting stuff up there on a regular basis, and that's called the Talent Equation as well. So basically search for those things and you'll find stuff coming out.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks again for doing take 2. Really appreciate you finding the time a second time, and it's just a testament to your passion for rugby and development of sports in general, and really appreciate you coming on the show again.
Absolute pleasure, Andy. I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing how the podcast develops, and I think it'll be really useful for all the rugby coaches out there. I'll definitely promote it to some of our guys.
Beauty. Thanks very much. I really appreciate that.
No worries.
All right. Cheers, Stuart.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.